All right, hi guys, welcome back to the High Man podcast. It is currently the 17th of July, 2023, 10 to 6 in the evening. Thanks for joining us again. We're on episode 36 now.
Yeah.
Yeah, nearly 37.
Yeah, it's about a year anniversary of starting the podcast.
Oh yeah, it would be.
Yeah, so we haven't done many in the past couple months, but
Yeah,
we'd do a quick one today and get back into it in the next few weeks once I'm back from holiday. So,
yes, yeah. Once we settle down.
Yeah, so we both finished uni now.
Oh yeah, forever, hopefully.
Yeah,
Don't want to go back.
yeah,
Not
big
for now.
milestone. But yeah, ready for the next chapter and ready for this episode today.
Yes.
So the idea for this episode is something I came up with reading this book called The Dream of Reason, which is kind of basically like a overview of the history of philosophy. And the specific part which made me come up with the question was talking about Socrates and his reason for valuing philosophy so highly in people's lives. Basically, what that is he believed that the reason people did the wrong thing, acted in unvirtuous ways, was because of ignorance, so lack of knowledge about right or wrong. And through the exploration of philosophy, you were able to better, decide what's right and wrong. And then he thought that rationally, with that knowledge, humans would make the right decision. So that puts kind of the importance of philosophy at the highest point, because that's how you learn what's right and wrong and then act in a better way. However, this is something his student Plato pushed back upon, because he kind of had a more realistic view of things, where rather than viewing humans as perfectly rational, he also could see that humans could act in irrational ways, which go against what they believe to be right or wrong, but they take those actions anyway and this is what we're going to explore in the episode, for a variety of different reasons. So I suppose just to start with, I'll ask you, what's your initial impression of Socrates' idea about knowledge being um, the key reason why people aren't able to act in the right way?
Well, I guess you could say knowledge has to be the foundation. Like not a foundation, but knowledge has to be there for you to understand how to act. Like you need to know what's right and wrong to be able to do the right thing. But doing the right thing, obviously, in my opinion, takes like another reason. Just knowing something's right and wrong won't necessarily motivate you to do the right thing. Although it's essential to have like the knowledge, the application is like the hard part, and that's quite different, I think. So I would push back as well on Socrates and say humans aren't necessarily rational animals that will do the right thing because they know it's the right thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of different motivations which humans have, which it's unrealistic for us to act in a perfectly rational way. And one of the reasons in the book, the author said that Socrates maybe thought like this was because he was so rational himself. So he kind of held other people to his own standards and the way he understood the world, when realistically other people wouldn't have been so rational to simply do the right thing, whether they know, just based on knowing it, and that alone being enough. But I suppose if we break it down into the different reasons people maybe do the right or wrong thing, so in what ways do you think lack of knowledge contributes to people acting in an unvirtuous way, to kind of play Socrates' side of the argument?
I'd say lack of knowledge more applies to like younger people. I think that as a kid you're growing up and you do wrong things, but then society or your parents or your friends teach you along the way that it is the wrong thing and there's the right thing to do. And as you grow older, you become a bit wiser, so you hopefully do less wrong things and more right things. So I say knowledge is something that kind of just gets gained through years of life and experience.
Yeah.
But then I guess people get stuck in like when you talk about trauma and stuff, people have these traumatizing experiences when they're kids, and then they kind of get emotionally stuck as a child and or like emotionally immature, and they haven't necessarily learned the knowledge they should have properly
Yeah.
because they've been traumatized. So as they get older, they still do the wrong thing because they haven't learned that knowledge. So maybe in that instance, if they were taught the right thing, they might understand what the wrong thing is and not do it. But
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it comes back to the fundamental question of like, how do we know what's right and wrong? And that's obviously a subjective thing. And I think what your argument there, the initial argument that for younger people they don't know what's right, but as you accrue experience, then you begin to have a better idea of what's right or wrong, and that's maybe comes through a like trial and error, where as you go through life you try different things, you try different ways of acting, you make different decisions at different points, and from those decisions you either have a good outcome, which improves your life in the long term and the life of those people around you, or a bad outcome. And through kind of that trial and error, that's what you learn is right or wrong. So that's kind of like a very practical way of realizing what's right or wrong. But like you said, I suppose through that's not always going to be a perfect system, because people may be rewarded for acting in unvirtuous ways. Was that kind of what you were pointing towards, or they have traumatic experiences
yeah,
which don't give them the proper feedback which would reinforce good behavior?
yeah, I think like you said, like as people go through life, they accrue an idea of what's right and wrong. But I think that if that was just a straight viewpoint, it kind of dismisses emotions. I think emotions play a large part into people's like actions,
Yeah,
and obviously, like we say, emotions are so subjective, and like, even if someone kind of treats you in a right way because of some trauma you might have, you might take it in the wrong way,
yeah,
and then you do something bad because of it or whatever.
yeah, yeah. So I suppose to play Socrates' side of the argument still, in that situation, the fact that the person doesn't respond to it, doesn't think that they do the wrong thing thinking it's the right thing because of certain traumatic experiences they've had in the past, that's because those experiences would have given them like inaccurate knowledge. So if purely trying to learn what's right and wrong through experience, you might run into some situations where you do the right thing but something bad happens anyway. And if
Right.
you never take the time to explore like what is right and wrong, then you might always kind of be a prisoner to the negative feedback you got when you were younger, when something bad happened, even though you did the right thing. When, contemplating it and learning about, virtues and what's right and wrong, you might come to realize, although in that situation I acted properly and something bad happened, um, I still did the right thing. Whereas we've never taken that time to contemplate this, maybe just on your own, or by reading different kind of sources of where people get their ethical knowledge from. So it could be philosophy, it could be religion, could be studying history and seeing what's however, or even just talking to someone who's wiser than you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think certainly, you know there is always an issue of it's you don't know what, like it's almost impossible to always know like what the right and wrong thing to do is. But perhaps, by making it a goal to gain knowledge in that area, you get a bit more accurate, so you know what's right and wrong most of the time. And ideally that would increase the probability of you doing the right thing. But
Yeah.
there's obviously other motivations at play, which
Yeah.
we can get into more.
I think like doing the right and wrong thing is, in my opinion, it's so different when you're involving other people compared to when you're just acting alone.
Yeah,
Like when there's an action and it only impacts you, like for example, going to the gym or not going to the gym, it's kind of a bit more clear cut what's right and wrong.
yeah,
But let's say if you're in like a social setting and you kind of have knowledge about each of the people in this setting and what they like and what they don't like, and how they feel like how each individual feels like they should be treated, you've got to walk this blurry like tightrope line. And if you act in one way, it could help one person but disaffect another person. So the right and wrong thing is so much more complicated when it involves other people. And I don't know how you can like necessarily say knowledge would give you like the pathway to the right thing, because knowledge on each of those individuals is what makes the line even more blurry.
Yeah,
because they conflict with each other.
Yeah, I suppose the argument against that would be that so you're saying like in a social setting, you might be able to treat someone in a way which the way you act will please one person and not necessarily please another person, or benefit someone in a certain way but have a negative effect on a different person. And I feel like maybe this even points towards more of an issue with only trying to figure out what's right and wrong through experience, because in that situation you've got different people and you can please one by doing this but not the other. So there's kind of like a incongruence where if you're simply judging the virtuousness of your own actions by how it directly affects people in a specific situation, like it's going to be hard to come to an answer. Whereas maybe to find what is actually virtuous, it requires taking kind of a step back and looking at things in a more abstract way, so you can maybe look past, the way you might so in that situation you might say something which is maybe say something which is true, but it upsets one person and it helps the other person. But if you've taken a step back and contemplated, and you think, the virtuous thing to do in a situation where you're unsure is to tell the truth, and that might hurt someone or benefit someone, but because you've taken the time to learn about why honesty is a virtue, then you can walk away from that situation, and even if it's not the perfect outcome in that moment, you can realize, this was probably the right thing to do.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So do you think that people need to establish what they think their principles they need to live their lives by?
Yeah.
They need to establish what their principles are and like obviously prioritize them. We did that episode on like the Stoic virtues, the 4 Stoic virtues.
Yes,
yeah.
it seems to me, definitely thinking about it now, like the way you put it there, people taking time to evaluate their own principles and to have a set of principles and have a set of values to live by. And obviously, like we said, it's subjective, and that might be different for different people. Like not everyone's beliefs are going to match, and that's fine. But you'd think it would be good for everyone if people took that a bit more seriously, and tried to know what was right or wrong. And obviously a lot of that's going to come through taking actions and this trial and error process. But at the same time, if you take time to kind of reflect upon your actions and what you could have done better, or what you did well, then that will help kind of almost reinforce the trial and error process in a more effective way.
Yeah, like when we first discussed this idea that Socrates said knowledge is the key to understanding what's right, or doing what's right and wrong. Like, I wonder what he really meant by knowledge. Like, how deep does this knowledge have to go? Like, understanding what your, let's say, top 5 virtues that you want to live your life by are. People can probably list 5 virtues they want to live their lives by, and there's a kind of like a baseline knowledge there. But if Socrates is kind of pointing towards something that's like a little bit deeper, like people actually being able to explain in detail what each of those virtues are and why they've stacked them on top of each other in that order, that's like a deeper version of knowledge. And I think if people did, like you say, have that time to reflect and actually understand why they believe the things they believe and why they want to act in certain ways, maybe knowledge would direct them to act in positive ways and stop doing wrong things.
Yeah.
But I wonder how deep the knowledge has to go.
Yeah. And I suppose that brings us into like other factors. So how our irrationality and our conflicting motivations can cause us to act in ways that we don't believe to be virtuous. So this was kind of the key issue with the way Socrates views things is that he completely he disregarded the fact that people can know they do the right thing. They can know what the right thing to do is, but they choose to do the opposite anyway, for a whole range of reasons. And you kind of mentioned, like, on an individual level, you think it's easier. You think more of the time it's the case that people know what's right or wrong, but they choose to do the wrong thing anyway.
Yeah, I think it gets a bit more complex when you involve other people, because not only is your subjective opinion being taken into account, you have to take in the subjective opinion of other people.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to actions that are isolated to just you, I think most people will understand that it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
At least for their life at that moment in time. And the reasons they do that, I don't know. I think, like, have you heard of that guy Gabor Mate?
No.
He's like a psychologist from Hungary, and he's got like a lot of work, and I think he's like a world-renowned specialist in like addiction, and he says that all addiction stems from childhood trauma.
Yeah.
He's got an interesting idea that, like, do you know how people will say, like, for example, alcoholism is a genetic disease? He doesn't necessarily believe the disease is genetic, but he believes that the trauma is passed down through generations. So it almost is defined as genetic, but what happens is you have an alcoholic father, he passes that trauma on to his kid, the kid ends up becoming an alcoholic and has that same trauma, and they can't deal with it, and then they pass it on through generation after generation.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea, but I'd say that kind of would influence my idea of why people do wrong things for themselves, which is because they don't respect the person they are, and they allow themselves to be treated wrongly by themselves.
Yeah.
Because they don't necessarily believe they are worthy of acting the right way, because they don't have any value for their own life. Not any value, but they don't have enough value for their own life.
Yeah. Yeah, you know that Brian Johnson guy, the guy who does all the things to try and live longer.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, I heard him talking the other day about how he wants to kind of expand the definition of violence to violence we commit towards ourselves. So obviously we understand that if, like, there's physical violence towards other people, it harms them, and like, for example, war, you're killing people, but we so easily refute. We don't treat things we do which kill ourselves, like eating junk food and not exercising and living in unhealthy ways. We don't class that as he wants to start, viewing that as violence, because it's everyone's got a problem if someone else is trying to kill them, but if they're killing themselves, then everyone seems to let it slide.
Yeah.
And yeah, perhaps there is an element of so you kind of think that it's the trauma basically causes people to have a lower self-value, so they don't so they're willing to kind of inflict harm upon themselves.
Yeah, it's probably for more extreme cases, like you get into the more mundane, like, examples of being on your phone too long every day. I think a lot of people do that, even if they do live like healthy, positive, and like have good mental health.
Yeah.
They'll still do that as well.
Yeah.
So it's not like trauma is the reason for every single wrongdoing, but I think when it comes to people that like continuously treat themselves in terrible ways with like drug addiction or things like that, or other things along those lines, like almost chronically doing the wrong thing, it could stem from having not enough self-value.
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't even necessarily have to have the self-value at that exact moment in time, but it's the idea that, like, you could be worth more. Like, we all know that we're kind of insufficient in the state that we are, but if you have hope and determination to level yourself up and reach a higher level of your own potential, you'll treat yourself better, even if you don't have value at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like two different things, I guess.
Yeah, that's something similar to what I've heard Jordan Peterson say. Like, there's this idea that people nowadays, they need like self-esteem, and he kind of just doesn't believe in the idea of self-esteem, because it's basically telling people that they should be happy and there's just nothing wrong with them, when deep down they know, like, obviously, everyone has their insufficiencies, but you should not try and artificially find value in yourself if you don't necessarily believe that it's there. And maybe there is a time and place where you need to kind of not be so harsh on yourself, but he believes the more powerful and reliable way to find that sense of value and start valuing yourself more is to look for that value in, not in what you are, but in what you could be.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps a more powerful and reliable place to find value. But I'm sure there's dangers in that as well, like not ever valuing yourself in the moment.
Positive self-talk is such a big thing. I think if you just constantly put yourself down, it's going to be a difficult road to live. But what other things do you think kind of cause people to do the wrong or right thing? So we've got this idea that like knowledge, having the knowledge of right and wrong can determine that.
Yeah.
Maybe trauma influences it, and your own idea of like what your value is. But then what else is there?
I suppose just the natural instinct to do what's easy rather than what's right is something that everyone probably struggles with to some degree, so especially in the modern day, because we've kind of been the immediate need to take action in order to survive, and kind of just do what's right by just following your instincts. Like we don't need to do that anymore for a lot of things, and like to do the right thing now, obviously it depends on someone's value system, but it is going to take if we look at a specific area in terms of taking care of like your mental and physical health, if you just indulge in whatever you're most motivated in the moment to have, so junk food and being inactive, just consuming entertainment and spending too much time on your phone, like these things aren't good for your mental and physical health, but they're kind of the easy thing to do. And I suppose the solution to that would be to and you could argue that the solution is one based upon like knowledge, is to take a step back and to think about like what you actually want from your life in the long term, because that gives you the knowledge of kind of the impacts your actions are actually having, which gives you some motivation to combat the kind of motivation to do the easy thing. You also have this motivation to do a hard thing, because even though in the moment it's not as pleasurable, like in the long term it actually gets you the life that you want. But I mean, even with a vision of how you want your life to be and understanding kind of the steps, you need to go there, which would be maybe solving the knowledge part of the equation. It's still a whole battle in and of itself to actually do the difficult thing, which is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Whether that be like going to the gym when you don't feel like it, having a difficult conversation with someone, which is, necessary for like a relationship to improve. Like, I feel like it's quite a broad idea, which applies to a lot of the things, a lot of the issues we come across in life is just, avoiding doing the difficult thing.
Yeah, and a comfort crisis.
Yeah,
as I've heard some people call it. Yeah, I always find it strange that like the natural instinct for humans is to do like unnatural things, like maybe not unnatural, but it's to do things that are bad for us almost. Like you say, just sit down all day, eat food that's bad for you, like high fat and high sugar content because it's got so many calories in it. And it makes me like kind of wonder, like you see these wild animals, and like the extreme example would be like when you see an animal get attacked and they've kind of been battered and injured, and they're probably in excruciating pain because they've got like half a leg torn off, but they still carry on walking back to their habitat or wherever.
Yeah.
The comfortable thing to do for them is to kind of just lay down and almost give up.
Yeah.
But it's like you don't hear them whining when they're walking. They're not like complaining and crying. They just kind of crack on and do what they need to do.
Yeah.
And it's natural for them to do that. And it seems like humans are kind of like the polar opposite at times.
Yeah. Well, this is something I heard Naval Ravikant talk about. Is like what you were saying there. Like it almost seems complete opposite for humans. And I think that's because as humans, we find ourselves in the complete opposite situation. So, like the way Naval Ravikant puts it is that historically, throughout our whole evolution and stuff, we suffered from diseases of scarcity. So, not having enough food, you know, I suppose that's one of the main things.
Yeah.
Not having enough water, like having basically to pursue to kind of to thrive and continue your survival. But in the modern day, we suffer from diseases of abundance. Like people, I'm not sure like exactly what the numbers are, but I think I've heard someone say like more people. Well, certainly in the Western world, it must be the case that more people die of obesity than they do of starvation.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's the kind of idea that now we have disease of abundance and we have unlimited access to information on the internet, but that causes like the disease of addiction.
Yeah. Unlimited access to entertainment as well.
Yeah. So we almost and the thing about disease like problems of scarcity is that we have our natural instincts and desires will drive us to get more. So that's like what the dopamine, like there's a book about the dopamine system called The Molecule of More. So basically like it's a molecule that causes us to pursue things and is responsible for all our motivation to get things. And when we were evolving, the motivation, any opportunity you had to get a piece of calorie dense food should be taken because that will help you to survive longer.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, that same instinct to seek calorie dense food is causing people to die from being obese. And like the same thing with information and like if a new piece of information, when we were evolving, if you found a new piece of information, it might help your survival. Whereas now, that same motivation for new information is what keeps us sitting on the couch scrolling through social media because that's the most low effort way of receiving new information and new stimulus. So it's a separate problem nowadays where, you know, like the solution to it, like I mentioned, how setting out your goals and realizing that the long-term implications of your actions can help you to like not take such short-term decisions. And it almost comes like, I think the part of the brain responsible for this kind of top-down control is the prefrontal cortex. That's like the most modern and evolved part of the human brain, which sets us apart, is our ability to
plan for the future.
And basically be able to take to make decisions which go against our fundamental desires. Like Andrew Huberman calls it like limbic friction, which is basically any time where we have the like fundamental urge to do the easy thing, whether that be eat the junk food or to stay in bed and not exercise. Like that's limbic friction, and the way we overcome that is through this kind of top-down control of being able to say no, even though my body and my mind is craving to do this one thing, I know that this other thing is better for me in the long term. So I'm like manually going to override those fundamental desires to be able to, do the thing, which is do the right. Back to the theme of the episode, like do what is right.
Yeah. I've heard him say like he even practices overcoming limbic friction through like little small things, such as like I remember he was on a podcast and he said, "Oh, in this moment I've got the urge to pick that pen up and just twirl it in my hand, but I'm trying to practice overriding my limbic friction so I say no.
Yeah.
And then that adds to the discipline.
Yeah.
And adds to your level of discipline.
Yeah.
I've heard also like Jocko Willink talk about, do you know how people will go on like diets or exercise regimes, and it will always, not always, but a lot of the time it kind of consists of do this 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time you get to relax and have your fun. His idea was, people say that discipline needs to be rewarded with non-discipline, but in his idea, discipline only gets stronger the more you use it.
Yeah.
And that's why every single day he's up at 4:30, unless he's like ill or something.
Yeah.
So he says like the more discipline you exercise in your life, the easier the discipline becomes. Rather than being like, oh, I can be disciplined for 6 days a week, and then on the 7th day I can do what I want. Because you got to reset yourself on Monday or the Tuesday or whenever it is, and then that takes an extra bit of energy to get back into the discipline.
Yeah.
So always practicing like overcoming limbic friction.
Yeah.
Seems to be the way.
Yeah. But I suppose like back to this debate about like what's right or wrong. Like, is it never right to do the undisciplined thing? Like, is there ever a situation? I suppose this is why it comes back to people's own value systems. Because there's an argument that if you just discipline yourself all the time, and if you always delay gratification, then you never actually have, you never actually get to have the gratification because you're putting it off all the time. So there's a certain point where that almost becomes you're tyrannizing yourself into doing the right thing to improve your life. But if you never take a step back to actually enjoy the life that you've improved, then it's all for nothing.
Yeah, like, you just live in a tyranny.
Yeah, like there's something that Chris Williamson says, like it gets to a point where you're sacrificing the thing that you want, which is to live a happy life, for the means of attaining it, which is delaying gratification. So there is a balance there, although yeah, I do agree that like probably. Yeah, one of the solutions I just mentioned, Chris Williamson says that that one of his solutions to it is kind of just to periodize it. So you have a period of a few months where you really crack down and delay gratification all the time, and then you spend, then you can take a month off and actually enjoy the fruits of your labor. So there's different ways of balancing it, but yeah, certainly a lot of the things, we talk, it's almost a bit abstract having this conversation about like, why do people do things which are wrong? Because there's different levels of doing what's wrong. Like eating some junk food when you're trying to lose weight is wrong, but also like fucking murdering someone is wrong. But they're like completely different. But somehow they all fall into the same umbrella a little bit. But yeah, certainly a lot of people's wrongdoings and the things that they do which ultimately make their life worse and isn't kind of the highest contribution is from a lack of discipline and from doing what's easy, even if they know what is right.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder like, even if you taught people the knowledge and how it applies to their life, and they had a real understanding of what their possible future could look like, would they even care? Like going back to Jordan Peterson's self-authoring program, if everyone in the world did that and you kind of force them to do it, would it make a positive change for the world? Or going back to the idea we talked about earlier, do they need to have this idea of self-value? Or do they need to have self-value for them to actually want to implement the actions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do kind of think from doing something like the self-authoring program, or just like even if people were forced to do that, when it comes to the issue of self-value, kind of thinking about a potential future which might be good for you and good for the people around you, like that enables you to see like the value which is possible in yourself. So I do think that exploration does have some benefit, but I do also think there is kind of a more fundamental issue of self-value that people need to learn to overcome.
Yeah, I think they do. But then I guess a solution to that could be the self-authoring program.
Yeah.
Like, how do you kind of teach someone self-value? Is one way showing them, is one way making them realise the potential they have for the future.
Yeah. I suppose it's different. It will be different for different people, because obviously you could argue that maybe most people would benefit from the self-authoring style of approach, where you realise the value which your future self could have, and gain value from that as you build towards becoming that person, because you gain some positive momentum and you start to kind of wire your dopamine system in a way that reinforces kind of doing the right thing. However, obviously for other people, the reason they suffer and they're not able to act properly is going to be for different reasons. And I suppose in an extreme case, you could look at someone who is like a workaholic and always thinking about like what's up ahead, and that's actually making them sacrifice like the enjoyment they could have out of life, and maybe the impact they could have, the positive impact they could have more in like their relationships with people. And for that person, getting them to kind of create more goals is probably the opposite of what they need. But at the same time, if they did something like the self-authoring program, they might start to they could reevaluate that, like, oh, actually the life I want in the long term doesn't involve like mindlessly pursuing goals.
Yeah.
So you could even argue that in that example where I tried to say that that's not the solution for some people, it almost is, but in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
But yeah, other ways of building self-value, like something that's just come to mind is like I think building good relationships with people helps you to build self-value, because if you're just in this vacuum where you're just on your own, like it's kind of, you don't get to see the positive impacts you get from like, I don't know, treating people well and like taking care of your family, for example. So that's maybe another way.
Yeah, like on the topic of like, for example, incels, like the online incels, like the classic stereotype would be like a young lad who's just in his room all day by himself on his computer, and they're classically quite fucking angry at the world and women in particular.
Yeah.
And they probably don't have much self-value for that exact reason that you're talking about. Like, they don't interact with people and don't see the fruits of the labor of treating people well and doing the right thing by them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, even, I think Peterson's talked about this a little bit, like in times of like true hardship, when you go through these periods of your life where things kind of aren't just necessarily working out, I feel like a lot of positive emotion comes from seeing how other people can help you, or seeing how other people help you. Like, for example, if you have a family member that's really sick, it's probably like so heartwarming to have family friends provide support and help when they can. And that might not necessarily give you self-value, but I think when you see someone do something good for you, and you realise that makes you happy in a certain way, hopefully that will motivate you to do something similar for someone else. And then when that does happen, you'll have some self-value.
Yeah. It inspires you to do the right thing.
Yeah. Then being isolated is just the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I guess you could be isolated, and I don't know. Like, I do think it's also very important for people to almost go out on like not retreats, but have like an exodus almost, and figure out what they kind of want their life to be like. Like, it's important for people to be alone and have isolation, like for certain periods of time throughout their life, because then they can reevaluate their life. And I don't think that it's necessarily important in that example for people to have input from other people. But individuals need to figure out how they want to live their own life in isolation, I think, and then come back into the real world and act it out.
Yeah.
So could you get someone that doesn't necessarily interact with other people that much, but has principles they've worked out they want to live their life by, and they act in the right way because of it? Yeah, so talking about like the idea of right and wrong, when people need to kind of make the judgment on what they think that is, I'd say it's really important for people to do that by themselves and in isolation. Not necessarily that they can't take input from other people and process it and then come up with their own ideas about that information. But I do think people need to kind of have this idea of what's right and wrong and make their own mind up by themselves.
Yeah.
And use isolation as a tool to dive into your own mind without any input from other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. So it seems like there is a role of this kind of contemplation by yourself about, because obviously, for example, doing something like the self-authoring program, like that's something we do independently, um, which can be a way people start to realize value. But yeah, I do think there is definitely some role in people in having in deriving value from kind of the social connections that you have, and that kind of motivating you to act in a proper way, because you want to. Maybe one of the key motivations that can give you is wanting to be able to support the people around you. So, like, if you realize that if you work harder, you can better support your family, or if you move away from like any kind of addictions like drinking too much or using your phone too much, you realize that you can spend more time with your family and have a more meaningful life. Like, that seems like it'd be the right thing to do. But I think maybe in a situation where people and this is one of the things which I think causes a lot of mental health issues for people nowadays, is kind of having a lack of meaning and lack of purpose. Because like back in the day, when people were kind of living more in poverty, like like if you were a lad, for example, you'd basically get um, like by the time you were 16, you're probably getting sent into fucking coal mines to work or whatever, in order, because you needed to do that in order to support your family. So that kind of responsibility was already given to you, and that made you, it almost forced you into a situation where you had to act properly in order to sustain yourself and your family. Whereas in situations nowadays, like if you're in a privileged situation like we are, there's less of a immediate motivation to go and do the right thing. Like, you could go around drinking a couple of times a week and there wouldn't really be any immediate consequences for it. But yet again, like, kind of considering the future impacts of your actions is how you can actually begin to gain the knowledge of how your actions, uh, whether your actions are right or wrong based on kind of the future impacts they have. And that's definitely a good place to start.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like having that responsibility thrust upon you at a younger age. Do you think it kind of ingrains? You can say ingrains the idea of what's right and wrong into a person's mind. But then, like we've talked about, how when you're a kid, you're so, like, to be vulgar, you're just so stupid compared to what you will be when you're older. So having that responsibility when you're a kid, is that a dangerous thing?
Um,
Or does it mold you into a better person over time?
I'd lean towards it molding you into a better person. Like, in what way do you think it could be a dangerous thing?
I guess the danger would be, like, for example, if you have someone that has to work from an early age to kind of support their family, I don't know if it's necessarily a danger, more of a shame that like they might not be able to enjoy life the same way
Yeah.
that other people could.
Yeah, it's like slightly suboptimal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like a kid not being able to just be able to relax and have a nice family meal with his family rather than thinking, oh shit, we'll have to cut down on that bit of the meal because it's too expensive, or
Yeah.
where are we going to find the money for Christmas this year or whatever.
Hmm.
It's just a shame that people have to go through that at younger ages.
Yeah.
Well, at any age, to be fair.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I guess it isn't necessarily a danger as such.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And maybe it's, it obviously varies between situation to situation because, like in a situation, let's say hypothetically, you are so you're like, I don't know, 200 years ago, like you're 14 and you need to go work in some like manual labor job to go and support your family. Like in that situation, when we talk about right or wrong, like that is the right thing to do, um, because that's how ultimately you're going to help sustain yourself and improve the quality of life of your family. And like, so in that situation, it's probably the right thing to do.
Mm.
But in a situation where we're like nowadays, you do have the choice more so about whether you want to do, and I suppose it will come down to people do have more of an individual freedom to choose like what responsibilities they want to take on. But I suppose that has the danger of people delaying taking on any responsibilities and not really and perhaps losing out on some of the meaning in their life and ultimately not doing the right thing because they have the freedom not to. Um, so yeah, obviously freedom is a privilege, but it comes with a different set of problems.
Mm.
Which I'm not going to sit here and say they're worse than having to be forced into working a job you don't want to for the sake of supporting your family. Like obviously, it's more of an ideal situation that we're in now, but it's important to understand that it does come with this added responsibility to make good decisions when you have the freedom not to.
Yeah, yeah. I guess there is a decision there that you have to make, whereas in the more unfortunate situation, the decision's made for you.
Yeah.
So your actions are already fucking planned out almost.
Yeah. And then it comes back to more, like a kind of a subjective way of thinking, like what's the best way to live your life. Like we're in a situation of freedom, like how much what is the right amount to like balance like work and like family relationships. Like that's something that probably the individual is going to have to like make decisions for themselves about, given the choice.
Yeah, like we did a big episode on like, do you kind of fuck about and find out in your 20s and just have fun and experience as much as you can to like kind of gain these memories that you'll have for life, or do you become more disciplined and get your head down and focus on a certain thing to become a master of it, and then hopefully the fruits of your labor will come to fruition when you're in your 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
And I'd lean more so to fuck about and find out.
Yeah.
Like it's not guaranteed that you'll even get to that age. You might as well go experience these different cultures.
Yeah.
Fall in love a few times or do whatever and have fun. But I guess that's as long as you're always building towards something slowly.
Yeah.
It's just more of a slower route, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. To be fair, I'd say, like back when we made that episode, for example, like I'd say I definitely have moved since then. I have moved in the direction of thinking it is kind of more valuable to like experience things like in your 20s, and it's not such a, not necessarily worth sacrificing all your 20s just for the sake of work and that type of thing, because there are certain things that first of all, things that you can only do like when you're in your 20s and before you've got family responsibilities, like certain travel things which you might want to do in your life. It's probably a good decision to take those opportunities whilst they're here, because although you like if you do the right things, you'll live a great life in the future. There are certain opportunities which which like there are things you're not going to do when you're like 40 years old and you've got kids, which you have the opportunity to do in your 20s, which might be worth taking if you're someone that values that. But yeah, like. But obviously, I still value like being disciplined and trying to work towards something and build yourself up as a person, because that's probably ultimately where like the most meaningful things in your life will be.
Yeah, I do think also that people kind of get stuck on this idea that you can only travel and have fun with different cultures when you're in your 20s. Like, you can do that when you're fucking 60 and retired.
Yeah.
Like Sam's parents, for example, like Polly was saying to me, like she's planning on and excited to kind of end up retiring in a few years and just kind of traveling for like a year or 2 years straight.
Yeah.
And just going around and having these fun experiences.
Yeah.
And I was like, shit, yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
Like, even if you're a person that has like 4 or 5 kids, or how many kids you have, and like disposable income isn't as high as it would be if you had no kids or if your own business or whatever, you just have to save for a little bit longer, and then you can do the traveling when you're a little bit older.
Yeah.
And like traveling and then having these cultural experiences isn't confined to being young and free and all these other things, because like the classic age is just a mindset and just a number. Like, I think that's true. I don't think people should shut down their lives and think they just need to retire and pick up a pension.
It's not such a black and white thing, is it?
No.
It's one of those things where like Chris Williamson said, it's good to kind of like periodize these things and spend a certain chunk of your life, maybe say for like 6 months, if you're really going to focus on work, and then like you maybe get an opportunity where you're in between jobs or whatever, and you can take a few months traveling. Like, it doesn't have to be such a black and white thing, and you can kind of get the richness of different experiences at certain points, but also kind of the fulfillment of pursuing goals and improving yourself at different points. And like for different people, there's going to be a balance there, but I suppose we just have to be grateful that like we're in the privileged position where we can kind of, you know, set our lives up in this way, and have the freedom to do things like travel, or choose to really work for a bit, and yeah, it's a real privilege.
So, it is indeed.
Yeah,
determine our own destiny.
Yeah. What's the time?
44.
44.
Yeah.
6:44.
Yeah.
Okay, we should probably wrap this up then.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. Sorry to cut it short, guys. We have commitments and discipline to be disciplined.
Got jiu-jitsu to go to.
Yeah, go get choked out.
Yeah.
Right then. Well, thank you very much, guys. See you next time.
See ya.
Speak.
Mosh.